Welcome to the Softland Central podcast, your home for market entry knowledge and resources. Softland Central is brought to you by Softland Partners, an online marketplace to help you find best fit resources for your market entry. Find them at softlandpartners.com. Hi, and welcome to Softland Central, the home of market entry. And today we are going to talk about culture and understanding as it relates to market entry, and clearly a huge topic. It's very easy to get sort of stuck in the where we grew up and where we lived for a long time in terms of how we communicate and relate to people. And clearly there are some differences as we move around the world. So we're privileged to have Lanie Denslow with us from Worldwide's Intercultural Training. I'm going to do that one more time. Worldwide's Intercultural Training. Welcome, Lanie.
Thank you, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. If nothing else, I'm learning how to say tongue twisters, so it's perfect. So let's talk about kind of getting into our topic here. And we see. I mean, I think there's just some amazing opportunities we have as we're going into markets to relate really well to the new market, and we see companies that do it well. But maybe we could talk about the flip side. And when you see companies that are challenged, what are some of the big things that really challenge companies as they're entering new markets to relate to their customer base in a way that is thoughtful and effective?
I think the first thing is companies often don't really think about that aspect. And that's what trips them up. So let me tell you a story about a company that got tripped up. This goes back a few years, but it illustrates the point. And the company was Walmart, which is very global. But if you look around, you'll notice that they're not in continental Europe. So they went into Germany, and then they spent a lot of money, and then they left. And while there were multiple kinds of problems, one of the things always cited was they didn't do what I'd call a deep enough dive into understanding the culture. And culture, and I'll talk about this in a minute, is really how we see it as how people behave. So Walmart trained their people as if they were coming to San Jose, where I live, greet people at the door, pack their bags with their groceries, sort of pre-COVID, chat with people, be friendly. And for the Germans, they said, don't touch my food. Once I put it in my bag, it's mine. Well, I put it in, and you don't touch it. And why are people flirting with me? And they didn't like it, and they didn't go back. So that's an example of a big company, very sophisticated. It's easy to make a mistake. And one of the things it's urgent for people to do is to really step back and think about what might be different. And everybody, I'm going to talk about it from the American standpoint because I'm an American and I know the most about our culture. But for everybody, the culture, the world you grow up in is how you expect it to be every place. It's reasonable. And let me take a step back and talk about what I think how we could define culture for this conversation. It's not film and it's not fashion, and it's not food, but it's how people think, what they think is the right way to live their lives, to do business. One of the writers about culture said it's the software of the mind. So you're not really aware, but you know how you're supposed to behave, what you're supposed to do in your life in business. And with that, you have an expectation about how other people are going to behave. And it's human nature that when they don't behave the way you expect them to, your reaction, unless you've really thought about it beforehand, is they're wrong and they're beginning your problems. So it's about how people believe they're supposed to behave. And we see it in business in terms of behavior. And that's what culture is in the context we're talking about today. So that's kind of a long answer to a short question, but
Oh, it was a perfect answer, and it wasn't necessarily a short question, but so it's funny, sort of as you talk about this, uh, I think about sort of in a related topic about language, because obviously that's a partner to culture, and so I have this experience when I travel, and I'm in a country where I don't speak the language. And let's just take this scenario where you're out to dinner, and I do my best to order food, and when the person who's caring for me doesn't understand what I'm communicating, my recourse as a very ignorant American is to speak louder, thinking that that somehow by just hitting them harder we'll have communicated. And do you see this kind of thing happen with cultural challenges, where we'll just double down on this a little bit and see what happens, and so on? But obviously it's a sort of a fool's errand, I suppose.
And I think it's very normal. And I don't think that you or me or Americans in general are different. People from around the world have that same reaction, is to pop up the volume. So I think your question is there an instinct to stay more strongly with your cultural perspective, whatever that means? So if it means that you think that being on time for a meeting, being 5 minutes early, but you're in, let's say, Mexico City, where being not.
I was thinking Latin America, yeah.
Yeah, being 5 minutes early doesn't guarantee that anybody else is going to be there. It makes me think of another story of watching an architect at a conference in Mexico City. This is a few years ago. I was there with a client who got so mad because meetings didn't start right on time. And he thought it was personally disrespectful to him. Clearly hadn't done any cultural work. That he decided he would never do business there and packed up and went home. But is it an instinct to double down on your own perspective? Yes, unless right. Because if you don't know that really the basic idea that there are different ways that people do things differently, you interpret it as being against you in some way. And the pity of that is that then you have these disconnects where people pack up and go home. If not physically, emotionally, they leave the relationship. And that's the heartbreak for me, to see that happen.
Yeah, and it certainly, I think maybe we should talk for a few minutes about empathy, because that certainly seems like a tool in the process of developing cultural understanding. And I suppose there are times when you have done research and will do research, and we'll talk maybe about sort of a process that helps companies navigate this. But do you want to kind of share your thoughts about the importance of empathy in terms of adapting to various cultural norms?
So I'd actually have to say I've never thought about it quite with that word in mind. Because what I think about is sort of a multi-step process. That first you have to grasp the idea that I guess it's several things, that there are going to be differences in how people behave, because that's culture, is what we see it as behavior. So there are going to be differences, that there are reasons that people behave in the way they do. This is nothing random. They believe for some reason that what they're doing is appropriate. And to be alert to the fact there are differences. And then to start to try to understand what those differences are and why they are. But also at the same time, it's valuable to think, all right, so they show up at a different definition of, maybe they show up 20 minutes late. But is there something else in the environment that I can grab onto that's maybe similar to something that I think? So a way to find not just differences and get stuck in, oh, they do it all wrong and it's so different and I can't stand this. But at the same time, recognize it's a learning, and that if you are alert to the fact that there are going to be differences, to ask yourself, are there similarities? So is this person who is always late really a big sports fan? Maybe you're in India, and maybe could they teach you a little bit about cricket because you're a really big sports fan? And in looking for that similarity, find some way to cross that barrier to figure out a little bit more about who they are and why they are. It's a tricky balance, but I think that's part of it. And maybe empathy is in the sense of recognizing that there are different ways to approach things, how to be efficient in business, how to get things done, how to show respect. One big issue is, how do we build relationships? So for most of the world, you know this, it takes a lot of time and energy to build a relationship before you can do business. Trade commissioner in Barcelona said to me, if you could just get your clients to have a proper lunch and a conversation instead of a sandwich in a conference room with a PowerPoint, they do a lot more business. So is there a way to understand there's the longer build the relationship before the business? And how does that work with the American attitude of, let's do the business and we'll get to know you while we work together? Once you can really get your head around that there are two ways to do it, you can start to see if there's some compromises that can be worked out. And I think maybe that's as close to the idea of empathy and understanding that it's going to be different and you can still be feel respected.
Oh, that makes so much sense. And it was funny, as you were talking about lunch in Barcelona, I was thinking about lunch in Tokyo, which is about 5 minutes long. Dinner, on the other hand, is 3 hours, but lunch is on the way to something.
Well, and lunch is much in the news right now because the French have just decided that it's okay in the time of the pandemic that you could eat at your desk. And even when I was there, I worked there for a year. That was scandalous. It wasn't allowed. It was completely wrong. And only in the last few months have they allowed that was okay. So lunch, eating hours and patterns of eating, and whether you spend time 3 hours over dinner or do you do sort of the New York 3 courses in 45 minutes. And there are stories about Chinese tourists when the first groups were going to France, and the tour people would arrange a meal at a nice French restaurant. And about halfway through, most of the Chinese people would leave because they weren't accustomed to having multiple courses served over a period of time. And it just didn't work for them. There's so much around meals that can be such a powerful way to come together. But if you don't understand, it can be challenging.
So let's maybe talk about, kind of bring the theory to practice. And so if I were a company looking to, let's say, for example, come into the United States, what are some of the things that I should do before I enter? And then, what sort of the process would you suggest in terms of how do we optimize our ability to adjust to the new culture?
Well, they're all the legal and accounting thing, all the rules.
Yeah.
But coming into a new culture, I think it's helpful if you do some research. You first of all figure out that it's going to be different. You do some research. There's lots of material. There are consultants like me. There are online ways. There are embassies and consulates that can help you. There are business associations. So whatever your industry is, there's likely to be an association that you can contact. There are double named chambers of commerce, the Chinese American, the French American, in almost every city that are a great source of support and information. And I think one of the most important things is to bring the idea of being curious about finding out what's going to be different. And coming into the United States, it's as simple as people have their hard time getting their heads around how physically big the place is.
I was going to say, is there one United States in terms of how going into Texas would be different than going to California, I believe, than going to, say, Massachusetts, in terms of, so there are certainly subtleties, not
But
big things, but.
The language, although we talk about everybody speaks English, as you go across the country, it sounds very different.
Sure.
There are words that show up in one place and not another. I grew up part of my life in Nashville, and 1,000 years later, I still say sir and ma'am, which I learned there. So yes, the regional differences. I think I told you I have co-authored a book called Working with Americans, and I did a lot of interviews with people from all over the world. And an attorney from Slovenia talked about the fact that the rhythm of even getting an appointment in New York is different than getting an appointment in California. So one of the things that's helpful to find is somebody who can be an informal mentor in a way. And this would be true coming into the United States or going out, is wherever you end up that's new to you, if you can find somebody who can be a coach and answer some of those questions and give you some tips, it's always valuable.
Yeah, I've heard that the term translator used in that role, not the language translator, but the idea that you can see the things that you're missing through someone else's eyes. I was even, as you were talking about California and New York, I was even thinking, gosh, even between Southern and Northern California, there's considerably different customs and so on. So it's I think very easy to think about the effect or adjustments a company might need to make from its public presence from a sales and marketing standpoint, whether it's sort of how the salespeople operate, or the expectations they have, and so on, and also the human resource side. So how do we treat our employees? How do we recruit, and all those kinds of areas of the business? But what other parts of the business would cultural understanding and adaptation be important?
Every bit of your people relationships. It's at the
customers.
It's internal.
Mm.
It's internal. So I did a project with a company based in New Jersey, and they brought their people in from New York, from Poland, Switzerland, France, someplace else into New Jersey. And they wanted to do a session about developing a global mindset, so there'd be some common sharing, understanding. And we did a little exercise about how long does it take to respond to an email. And at the end, we did breakout sessions, all that stuff. It was really a lively, terrific group. And at the end, a fellow from France said, so I suppose it means that taking a week to answer an email is too long. And there was the room just fell apart laughing at that point, which actually was a great outcome, because once you can share a laugh about something, you can talk about it. But culture is all about, if business is all about people coming together to try to achieve some common goal, entering a country, selling a lot of stuff, whatever that might be, then people need to know how to engage with each other. And it doesn't matter whether it's your call center or your sales staff or the people who are developing coding for your next app. And so cultural understanding, awareness, training, translating is essential to have an effective teams at every level.
No, that's really, really interesting. So one of the things I think about as you were talking is, we both introduce people probably quite often, and it's always interesting to me, and the people I'm introducing quite often are, not just in the US, but in other countries as well. But the speed at which people reply to introductions, and you were talking about the email follow-up, but yeah, I mean, there's such huge variations, and I mean, there are some people that it's literally the emails in their inbox for probably a minute, and they're boom, right on it, and then others it may be days or never, and so it seems like we're communicating as we're doing that in terms of whether it's importance to us. And I think, in at least my hypothesis is, in some cultures, for whatever reason, people wait for the other person to acknowledge the introduction before they respond. And but anyway, it's always interesting to me to see what happens there.
Well, in some places, people aren't going to respond rapidly, if at all, if they don't really already know the person who's writing to them. There are a lot of places where you don't get to do business unless you're introduced by a trusted person who can serve as making the official introduction for you. So sometimes people just don't respond because they don't know really who you are. It's a very American thing of, oh, well, we don't know who you are exactly, but what you have to talk about is interesting. So let's try and at least have a conversation, because maybe that next big idea rests with you. But that's not the norm everywhere.
Sure. No.
And today, I think people are just busy and have full inboxes. And I've learned that when I don't get an answer, sometimes maybe I need to pick up the phone. The spam filter, I've decided not to be mad the first time, but the spam filter may have prevented them from even seeing my message, which I think is the most important thing ever.
I like that. No, the phone is way underused, so I totally agree. And better than Zoom.
Indeed.
So let's talk about you've worked with many companies over the years, and I'm sure there's a continuum of those that sort of got it and had and exercised a very good process and plan, and others that may not have been quite as strong. But when you think about the attributes of the companies that adapted and modified their practices to the new culture, what were some of the things that you observed that was common between those companies in terms of their approach and in any respect?
Well, I'd say that the first thing is people being interested in this whole idea that it's going to be different. And a lot of my work is the introduction of the idea of cultural differences and getting that set for individuals and companies more than long-term follow-through. So, but I think the chairman of IKEA said at one point, the farther we go from home, the more we have to take the time to learn about the other culture. And I think companies who have some form of that idea are the ones who are the most successful over the long term. That they recognize it, that if it starts from the top, that this is an important issue, if they provide training for their people, One of the things that I think is considered or has been successful over the years is the idea of bringing people together, not doing off-site meetings, but bringing people from either the regional center or to the headquarters so that they could see each other. We see each other on Zoom, but it's not the same. And that people can really see each other's work environment. And that helps people understand each other. And I'd say it's just a long-term commitment.
I really
It's
love, oh, I'm sorry.
Go.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I love the notion that it has to be, it's a leadership thing. It starts with the leadership committing to the process of developing into the culture that exists that in the markets they're expanding to. I think that's that's so critical.
Yes, it always is. What is the example from the leadership that's going to filter through the company and where they put their resources? And it helps human resources implement training, and if they have the full support of the senior leadership.
That makes a lot of sense. So you've taken us on an incredible journey, and I think it's probably appropriate that we share with folks who you are and a little bit about Worldwise Intercultural Training. Do you want to share a little bit of your background and what you do for companies today?
So I came to this as maybe a third career. I'm one of those lucky people who's had a chance to do a number of things. And at one point, I was in the real estate business and decided I needed to broaden my experience, and the business was becoming international. So I took myself off to grad school to get a Master's of International Business and MBA, and got captured, stunned by this whole area of cultural differences and the impact in business. And so I tell my friends I set out to change the world because I could see that this was an impediment, a barrier to people being able to do business. And it was so unnecessary. With a little understanding, teams could function so well. And over the years, I took a little detour, and I was the director of international affairs for the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising. Did a lot of international work and work with consular corps, trade people, and at the same time developed a practice of presentations and some coaching around this whole idea of cultural differences. And so about 5 years ago, I decided to full-time spend my energy doing that, which I am doing now. I've worked with, interestingly enough, a number of law firms, some accounting firms who are parts of global networks. And so it isn't just their clients that are from other parts of the world, it's often colleagues. And that's been a really satisfying, interesting project. I've learned a lot, which is always for me a good thing. So I offer customized training, whether it's a 45 minutes of a big short overview or a full day session about developing a global mindset. I do some individual coaching. So with somebody making their first trip to China, why to say yes to dinner when you want to go to bed. And if you're going, I worked with an attorney who was going to Saudi Arabia, and he came back and said the most useful thing I'd said out of everything was that if he was working with a woman, let her extend her hand to shake hands, not to make the first gesture. And he said it saved him some would have been uncomfortable moments. And I love it all. I love it all. So, and I've written 2 books, had the 2 books published, one called What to Know Before, Worldwise, What to Know Before You Go. So aimed at Americans starting to do their international business. And then just had the second edition of Working with Americans come out. And I think I told you before, the timing wasn't perfect at the end of 2019, but it's beginning to get some legs again. And with my co-author, we thought there really was a need to explain the behaviors of Americans, how we do things, because it's so different than most of the rest of the world. And if we could explain it in a way that was easy for people to understand, maybe it would be easier for people to make the connections, build their business together with their American colleagues. So that's a short, long answer. That's what I do.
That's fantastic. So you mentioned professional practice firms. Are there other types of companies and organizations that you typically work with?
I have worked with a trucking company, pharmaceutical company. I've done multiple programs for different organizations. I just did a presentation for the Forensic Expert Witness Association. Who knew something like that existed? Such interesting people. And we really focused on one small slice of cultural difference, and that was nonverbal communication. So everything I do is customized for the client. And every time I have a chance to learn quite a bit. And I have to say that being part of Softland Partners has really been a learning experience too, learning from everybody who's a member, and having a chance to engage has really been a great experience for me.
Oh, that's so sweet. Well, I wish I had known you before I had taken several trips to the Middle East, where I, of course, reached out my hand to shake hands with every woman I met, which, as you know, 3/4 of the time they don't reach back. So, yeah, and it's such a hard habit to break. You have to be so attentive to it. And I come from the standpoint or the viewpoint where here, if you shook hands with a man but didn't offer it to a woman, it would be insulting. So it's a very difficult adjustment for my lizard brain.
Yeah, it's hard for everybody. And, it's those small things that can make a difference in just being comfortable beginning that relationship. So
yeah,
my goal is to make it easier for people to engage with each other.
Yeah. Well, and you certainly don't want to feel like you're putting somebody in an uncomfortable place or in any way insulting them. So yeah, no, it's always one of those things you walk away from and go, I should have done better there. Well, thank you, Lanie. This was so fantastic. So many great tips. Is there anything sort of as we close up that you want to make sure people know about, or any last words of wisdom?
I would say that I would encourage people as they enter new countries, new places, to bring with them their curiosity. Go in looking to see what might be different or similar and how you can build out of that, because it's the relationship that always makes the difference. And don't be afraid or feel uncomfortable asking for help, looking for that mentor or translator who can help you over the rough spots. But be curious and you'll find really good things.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's such wonderful advice, and I know our audience will gain a lot out of it. So we're going to put your contact info in the description down below. Is there a favorite way for people to reach you? Email or LinkedIn? What do you prefer?
Email, LinkedIn, text me, call me.
Smoke signals, anything?
Flexible. Send me an old-fashioned letter with a stamp on it.
Well, we know you like the phone, so they could call you. Yeah, that's
good with that.
Brilliant. Well, to Lanie, thank you. To our audience, please make sure you like and subscribe, and that way you stay up to date with all the great content we have coming out. So thank you again, Lanie. I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you very soon, I'm sure.
Okay. Bye, Bill.
Right.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye now.